Welcome to our Monday program, study and practice. And we're going to be looking at Steven Goodman's The Buddhist Psychology of Awakening. As I often mention, these Buddhist studies, we should really go to them in the sense that we're looking at something that gets to the bottom of what causes suffering universally. And as such, it's not really a trivial undertaking, but it has actually tremendous ramifications in terms of us understanding the world and also what we can offer to the world. So the insight that we are gaining from these studies, we should really see as, in many ways, a service to the larger community that we're a part of. And this is, strictly speaking, within the Buddhist context, what we call preparing with bodhicitta, that we have this kind of magnanimous vision about what we're doing. And this, of course, applies to both study and practice. I thought before we begin, I'd just like to dwell a little bit on what we refer to as the Buddhist psychology, because, of course, psychology is it works to refer to a text like this as psychology, because that is, in fact, how we generally understand all studies of the mind. And of course, what's particular then about this is that it's about something called awakening, and that is where the Buddhist psychology of awakening takes us beyond the general psychology, which is not really about awakening, but which is more sort of addressing pathological issues with the objective to arrive at a place of normalcy. And so the Buddhist understanding and the Buddhist vision and the Buddhist purpose extends far beyond with what we normally understand with psychology. But of course, it's legitimate to use the term psychology because that is what most of us, how most of us understand the study of the mind. But I thought it would kind of be interesting to just have a look at how very often psychology is understood. And I looked at the Encyclopedia Britannica. We're not going to go through the whole article, obviously, but it says psychology, the scientific discipline that studies mental states and processes and behavior in humans and animals. The discipline of psychology is broadly divisible into two parts: a large profession of practitioners and a smaller but growing science of mind, brain, and social behavior. The two have distinctive goals, training, and practices, but some psychologists integrate the two. So let's just identify that, in fact, what we're looking at here is in many ways consistent with how we would understand psychology as it's defined by Encyclopedia Britannica, in the sense that it's about mental states and processes and note behavior in humans and also animals, I guess. And this sort of is consistent, actually. I looked a few other places, obviously looked in Wikipedia, and their psychology is the science of mind and behavior. So psychology includes the study of conscious and unconscious phenomena, as well as feeling and thought. And then finally, you have then Guru Google, who says the scientific study of human mind and its functions, especially those affecting behavior in a given context. Now, this is significant because the way that we understand psychology in the general modern context is very much tied up with behavior. And we would generally say that the study of psychology is, of course, with the objective of arriving at normalcy, it's very much about what we do, what we say. Typically, psychology will operate with what we're feeling, what we're thinking, but also very much linked up with our actions in terms of verbal actions and physical actions, behavior, and so forth. And also, this particularly is actually related to then behaviorism and this sort of the way that Western psychology, which is a very new discipline, it's little over 100 years old, sort of evolved and involved very much understanding the human condition through observing how people behave. So in that sense, the study of psychology is very much about what we're doing, how we're behaving, and so forth. And this actually translates into a lot of us who approach Buddhism very often in terms of thinking, what should I be doing? You know, the question, what do Buddhists do? And what should I do as a Buddhist? You know, you think maybe I should be meditating, or maybe I should go to the temple, or maybe I should do have a shrine and so forth. And of course, this is where Tsongtse Rinpoche famously, he would say it would be so much easier if we just had some set rules about what we should eat and where we should go on pilgrimage and so forth. But the thing is, the purpose of studying the mind in Buddhism, and while it does include behavior, obviously, while it does include mental events, and particularly Abhidharma is about that, it's really with the purpose of going beyond that. It's with the purpose of beginning to experience something that lies beyond our behavior. But particularly then what we mean with awakening is a condition that's not affected by all the various we could say it's a ground of who we are that's not affected by all the causes and conditions and experiences that we go through. An uncontaminated core of clarity that lies at the basis of all life. And it's with this vision that we then speak about enlightenment. This is what the Buddha awoke to, is this thing that, or this condition, or this ground that is basic to all sentient beings, and that we as Buddhists refer to as Buddha nature. That is the objective of what we could then call the Buddhist science of mind. The Buddhist science of mind is not only about mapping, not only about being able to identify, objectify, label, and so forth, but it's really part of an applied science which is intending upon eliminating or curing us, healing us from a delusional condition that brings us then to awakening, to the state of liberation, the state of enlightenment. And so we should, when we talk about Buddhist psychology, then we should be aware that it's a psychology that actually has tremendous ramifications and a tremendous vision. And while we, of course, can operate with a lot of the vocab that we have from, you could say, the more confined, ordinary psychology that we have been developing over the last 100 years in the West, from the likes of Freud and Jung and so on, then really the objective and the point of Buddhist psychology extends far beyond that, and of course extends into a domain that is generally not familiar to the modern audience. And very often for that reason, unfortunately, then Buddhism gets thrown into the category of religion, because Buddhism speaks about things that are not ordinarily known within the, you could say, confined science that we're familiar with. So from that point of view, then we would want to appreciate that when we're studying the Buddhist psychology of awakening, we're moving into a domain that has a tremendous vision and a tremendous scope, and also which is very much about application. So what Steven is talking about a lot here is, of course, the intention of this study, as of, you know, the intention of this study is that it should inform our practice. So this is then where we're at here in terms of the last time we looked at the Four Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Paths, and then now we're going to look at the benefits of study and practice. So Steven writes, at the end of the day, what do we imagine we might get through the study and practice of the Dharma? What do the Dharma treatises promise us, and what are their guarantees? What are their contraindications? What are the side effects? Will we see rainbow colors everywhere if we just sit long enough and calm enough, are spacious enough, and learn well enough how to grasp? Well, perhaps not. And this is, of course, interesting, because inevitably we will and we should question, what is this about? And at the same time, also, the process itself is very much facilitated by the willingness to let go of our expectations. And particularly, Chögyam Trungpa, he makes a point about how when we're meditating, actually we need to let go of this questioning. We should definitely have these questions. out of meditation, before we engage in meditation, before we engage in the path. We should think critically. But the journey itself is about actually connecting with that which is not caught up in information, not caught up in data, but very much situated within an immediate experience of feeling, being present, and so forth. And that's where we actually need to step out of this, like, where are we going to, and actually begin to connect with where we are. This could sound a little bit simplistic, but again, this makes a big difference. Then continuing, then referring to Chögyam Trungpa, then Steven says, Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche once said that the sign of an advanced Dharma practitioner is that he or she discovers that life becomes somewhat more workable. And on another occasion, he said that the sign of a good Dharma practitioner is that they no longer feel the need to apologize for the varieties of their neurotic tendencies. So this, of course, means that we become what Trungpa Rinpoche also referred to as shinjangt, means that we begin to have some proficiency in terms of working with our mind, that we begin to see how any given situation is composed of so many different circumstances that we're never ever stuck with our own particular mind in one way, and similarly also the situations where we're in are workable. They're made up of many different causes and conditions that can be worked with. And also then, as far as that goes, then we definitely have to humbly admit that we're just ordinary beings. We're ordinary sentient beings operating within the insecurity of self-centering and so forth. The presence of our insecurity manifest as ego is going to drive us into all sorts of patterns that we have been accumulating since a very, very long time. And so these patterns, when they unfold, is not really a sign of failure of any way. They're pretty predictable. So as much as we're working with them, as much as we, for example, in the Buddhist practice, there's a lot of emphasis on confession. It never ever means that we're actually stuck as bad persons. We don't define ourselves in terms of the slip-ups of the neurotic tendencies we have, but at the same time we also work with a vision that we needn't be defined by and held by these. And so there's a lot of emphasis in the Buddhist tradition. Generally in monastic contexts, twice a month you have the whole practice of renewing vows. As tantrikas, then people practice tsok twice a month, practice feast practice in order to amend their commitment to the path and so forth. So it's completely predictable that we're going to be continuing, particularly neurotic tendencies, what we have, but that doesn't in any way define us. There's no need to be shocked by it or apologize for these tendencies that we have. Steven continues, for those of us who are not advanced practitioners, but are of average or lesser capacity in realization, it's important to realize that it's natural, even as a Dharma practitioner, or maybe especially as a Dharma practitioner, that quite often things are not going well at all. Also, if we actually feel we are of average or lesser capacity, we may experience embarrassment and try to prevent others from discovering how truly neurotic we are. The point here is that it is to be expected. And in that sense, it's natural and even predictable that we defend and deny the range of our rather crazed internal musings. The Buddha Dharma reminds us that this defense and denial is to a very great extent just who we are. Therefore, there's no point in fighting it or hiding it, especially from ourselves. The Buddha Dharma suggests that the cultivation of an attitude of acceptance towards how we are, a mindful acceptance that we will experience many varieties of pleasant and unpleasant mental and emotional states, is natural. So again, that's a given. We might actually think that we should be perfect. We've signed up as practitioners. We define ourselves as practitioners. We maybe don't make a big noise about it, but we might actually have some inner expectations to ourselves, and we might feel that we fall short of these. And of course, while we need to do something about it, it doesn't mean that we have failed in any way. Actually, this is where it's very helpful to see the masters, because very often if you're around Buddhist masters, they'll be very humble. That's the beauty of the masters. They of course, they're guiding us. They might sometimes be heavy-handed and so forth, but also very often the example of modesty and humility, and a good sense of humor about the sort of the quirky condition of being a sentient being. Very often masters will bring out the weaknesses in their students, not because the masters themselves need to expose the weaknesses of the students, but more for the students themselves to actually realize this and also see how this condition is workable. And very often if we're trying to hide these kind of embarrassing aspects of ourselves, then actually having them brought forth either through our own practice or through the provocation of circumstances or the master and so forth, is actually a way that really enables us to process and work with our limitations and break free of that. So this is where our imperfection is completely to be expected, completely natural. Stephen says, it is precisely the varieties of everyday neurotic experiences that we will explore in this book. The focus will be on the very basic teachings of the Dharma, and we will come to see how these teachings, classified as the higher Dharma, Abhidharma, lay out the variety and dynamics of these ever-changing states. So this is what we're going to be looking at. And the more we actually have some idea and understanding of all the different sort of circumstances that inform our actions, our impulses, and so forth, the easier it is for us to work with them, both in everyday life and in the practice of meditation. So someone saying, reading this is so heartwarming. That's good. And just because we're still actually mourning Stephen, I would like to highlight how Stephen was a very warm person. So when you're reading this, you're not reading just a cold academic representation, but actually a very sympathetic fellow practitioner, somebody who very humbly and very capably studied with great masters and learned a lot, and then is communicating this very compassionately, very gently, and with a lot of intelligence. Yes, someone comments, yes, he does come across as someone truly understanding our human heart and psyche. When you say beyond behavior, are you meaning what motivates or leads to our behavior? Beyond sounds like a faraway place, not sure I understand. No, we're looking at that which is beyond the ordinary insecurity of I. You know, what makes up our sense of identity is the sense of I exist and I'm solid. But the reality is, if we look, we're many, many different things. And that's where we begin to see beyond our basic ground, which is this insecurity of me, the sense of me. And that's where and this is something we actually naturally do. There's places where, because we are so many different things, we naturally are generous at sometimes, but then we retract into being insecure. And when we get very caught up in our thinking or very caught up in our sort of reactive patterns, when we have fears and so forth, then we retract into, you could say, more brittle shells of self. And when we begin to be relaxed and more open and more connected, then this sort of melts. And that's where it's more than just behavior, but it's actually beginning to see the purity, this innate ground of purity that we naturally possess. So it's not like something far away. It's actually the closest thing that we have. It's the closest to what we truly are. And what we have right now is that we're a little bit out of it. So we're addressing this. And that is not about behavior. Sometimes behavior can be, addressing our, lifestyle and the sort of our ways that we act can be very helpful. But we should keep in mind that our real clarity and sense of ease or sense of neurosis and paranoia all lie within a dimension that's not particularly about behavior. Finding the right medicine. Steven says, when we consider the first step of the so-called Eightfold Noble Path, right view, it's not at all obvious what the right view actually is. Okay? Okay, I have a footnote here for you people. What is the Noble Eightfold Path? So remember, we have actually three sections that correspond to what we call wisdom, that correspond to our ethical behavior or discipline, and then what constitutes meditation. So we talk about this sometimes in terms of three trainings, right? But the first one that has to do with wisdom is something that comes about through right view and right thought. Right view is important, particularly then, because that is really what gives us the perspective, the map of where we're going. So, of course, when we enter into Buddhism, we're going to be encountering a whole science with its own particular vocab and so forth. And even though what Buddhism is about lies beyond Buddhism, in the sense that it's pointing to what is our natural condition beyond words and practice and anything, then nevertheless, we have a vehicle that takes us there. And that vehicle comes with some perspectives that it would like to communicate, some pointing out the nature of reality. And then with that insight into reality, we have then some direction of where we're heading. And that's what we call the view. So anyway, Steven says, therefore, it is said that study and practice are necessary, not only to find the right view, but also to establish that view in a concrete way in all the different situations of our lives. Right view is not operating only when we're calm and being good Buddhist practitioners, but also when we're distracted and when we completely forget all the hard advice of our teachers. The goal is to be free from distraction, both when we're calm and when we're agitated. The way to do this harder practice is a deep, vital, and not obvious thing. So we're looking at what we are, and we can draw on our experience from our confused condition and from our enlightened condition. And of course, we begin to understand what takes us where. But it's this overall understanding of the dynamic and the nature of the mind that's going to inform our journey. So that's what we call view. Steven says, sometimes the Dharma is likened to medicine for those who are dying. There are other ways teachers have characterized the import of the Dharma. A contemporary teacher once said that the purpose of the teachings is to encourage us to become totally free, to be autonomous and flexible, and not to be conditioned or caged, not even caged or conditioned by the teachings themselves. It is said that the role of a good teacher is to skillfully encourage us to come out of all limited perspectives, to reveal to us our secret hidden faults. Paul Rinpoche, who lived from 1808 to 1889 and who is author of many, many works, including the acclaimed classic on Buddhist practice, which in its English translation is entitled The Words of My Perfect Teacher, puts it starkly. He quotes the Bengali master Atisha, who lived from 982 to 1054, and who writes, "The best spiritual friend is one who attacks your hidden faults. The best instructions are the ones that aim squarely at those faults." And that's coming from that very confident place that we're innately pure, we're innately good. And so when we have a pebble in the shoe, we can't pretend that there's no pebble there. It's only too obvious that we're suffering. We might pretend, oh, that I'm just fine, but it might be obvious to somebody else who observes us that the way we walk and the sort of awkward expressions we have, that there's something that's bothering us. And so from the sage's point of view, then the faults that we have are really external to our basic goodness. And so it only makes tremendous sense to actually expose these. In the context, and also just just about what was said before about, of course, the nature of the objective of the teaching is for us to be free, even of the teaching itself. This we also had in the Indian sage Dharmakirti, who famously likened or compared the Dharma to a boat or a vessel who takes us across the ocean, but then once we reach the other side, then it has no purpose anymore. So in that sense, the Dharma is really something that points to something that lies beyond the Dharma itself. Or when we have the image of the Buddha pointing to the moon, then of course it's not about the finger having being the absolute sort of refuge. It's the moon. And so what the Buddha wanted us is to become free, to be ourselves free and enlightened. But that journey then goes through actually being willing to be honest about our present condition. The more we can be honest about our present condition, the freer we are. The more at ease we are with reality rather than our sort of stilted attempts at covering up. Stephen continues, in the context of the Eightfold Noble Path, those hidden and habitual faults are the ones which block right view from emerging and guiding us on a genuine spiritual journey toward awakening, one suffused with what the Dalai Lama characterizes as clarity, kindness, and insight. So again, it's with these habitual patterns that they are what sort of get in the way. And again, these aren't predictably there. So we're not bad Buddhists because we have these. That's completely predictable, legitimate, but it's also what we are working with on the path. It's that we're working with, where our path is not going to consist of us sort of dressing in white and speaking softly and sort of being love and lighty and sort of only saying nice things, which we can do. There's nothing wrong with that as far as behavior goes, but we have, certainly within what's going on inside, we have to be completely honest with what's happening. And that's what gives us then the confidence of the true validity of the path. And that brings about then where Stephen is actually quoting a title of one of the books of the Dalai Lama. And I think these are actually one of the books, not just that the Dalai Lama wrote the foreword for, but actually this is a book that he wrote, which is then Clarity, Kindness, and Insight. No questions? Okay. Can you repeat the title, please? Yeah, well, the title is actually what Stephen is referring to there. He says the Dalai Lama, our path should be one suffused with what the Dalai Lama characterizes as clarity, kindness, and insight. So that's a title actually of a book by the Dalai Lama. If I'm not remembering wrong, this happens too. Okay. Now this right view is about something basically cultivating this what we call prajna or insight. And we would generally talk about three kinds of prajnas, or rather three ways to genuinely cultivate insight, which is then through study, hearing the teaching, and this is important. We have to have the humility to actually think that I could learn something from the Buddha, not just sort of use the Buddha's information to develop my own point of view, but actually try to hear what the Buddha is saying, what the masters ever since the Buddha are saying, then to sort of take that and then combine that with what we could call critical thinking, where we actually begin to see how does this apply in terms of my personal experience. So we're not just learning some information, which is the study part, which is the new information coming in, but we're also processing it in terms of understanding how this applies to our own experience. And it's on the basis of then the twofold you could say, modality of study and reflection or critical thinking, that we then begin to meditate. And then it's then with these then that we generate wisdom. So we have what we call the wisdom or the insight based on study, the insight based on reflection, and then the insight based on meditation. And to meditate, we first need to have this view. We need to have clarity. We need to have certainty. And that's why we study. Steven says, many teachers have stressed the importance of taking delight and enjoyment from study. But unfortunately, like a little child who doesn't know the actual taste of many foods, we might be falsely encouraged to put everything we see into our mouth, only to find out that it doesn't correspond to our nature. And so we reject or spit out those foods. Some like to approach their studies as if they were invited to an elaborate buffet or smorgasbord. They're not obliged to eat everything, but they see instead, but they're not obliged to eat everything they see, but instead choose what they like according to taste, perspective, or temperament. The point is to discover through experimental tasting what brings us to depth and clarity. All that does not bring us to such depth and clarity can be set aside. This, of course, is where we have to be honest, because there might be things that we might sort of gravitate towards just because they sound so far out and wonderful, but they might actually not really be, have much to do with the price of eggs. And we're sort of just fascinated with all sorts of far out sort of statements or things that lead us to fantasize about what might be. So that's where, after sort of some people might like to begin with a dessert, but eventually they might have to get down to just eating proper food. They might have to actually eat something that sustains them and nourishes them. Anyway, we have to then, having seen what various teachings they are, we need to adapt them to our actual needs. Stephen continues, one of the ways in which an aversion to certain topics of study may manifest is with a sense of agitation or drowsiness, terms we may generally associate with calm abiding, shamatha, or insight, vipassana meditation practice. But all of us in our everyday lives are sometimes agitated or sometimes depressed. We might say that the Buddha encouraged us to understand that being human is more or less to cycle through ups and downs. So there is really no need to apologize for that. We might in time come to recognize and accept that these ups and downs are in fact our nature. And more to the point, we might come to discover that these ups and downs are not at all permanent or invariant. They are based on the coming together and cooperation of many factors of experience. So we might be, put it plainly, bored with some topics, but then again, we also might realize that these are necessary. We might actually accept the conditions that we sort of, that we operate within, wanting to be entertained and so forth. So that's where, in doing that, we need to sort of go beyond our ordinary sort of expectations of wanting to have something dramatic that can entertain us, and actually, again, that we work with what is actually our condition and understand the whole process of the study as one of actually mapping and understanding the experiences, the ups and downs that we go through. And that's where we can begin to see that we are actually not fixed in one particular way. Everything we experience is actually just various circumstances that work together. Oh, long question there. Some people must type very fast. Ooh. Okay. Why is it so important to point our false ordinary neurosis? Not sure I get it. Because if we have a pebble in the shoe and we're pretending we don't have a pebble in the shoe, then somebody says, hey, you'd be much more comfortable if you took that out. Then we go, wow, that's so nice. And likewise, our neurosis comes from an assumption that there's me And that's where we operate from. And unless somebody actually could point out that this situation of self-centering and all the games that we operate from, they're actually unnecessary. We needn't actually drag around this insecurity. It's like if we arrive in a place where we're new and we think we need to sort of project our image in a particular way, until we find out that nobody's actually asking us to be in a particular way. You know, somebody might come up and say, hey, just relax, chill out. You know, you don't have to be splendid or anything. So that's where we understand that we have conditions in our mind that drive us to act out of this insecurity of self and insecurity of self-centering. And this pattern around the self-centering is what we call the kleshas, the toxic conditions of the mind. And they all operate with the flawed assumption that self is such a big deal. And that's where the secret of the universe really is, that we needn't do that. But because we do that, we begin to develop a whole shell of me that operates within this, you could say, the strategies of what we call attachment and aversion. And these give rise to what we call the kleshas, the toxic conditions of the mind. And as long as we're caught up in these toxic conditions of the mind, we have all sorts of attitudes and assumptions and patterns of action that drive our suffering. So that's why it's so important that we deal with this. This is where we talk about the suffering, but we want to understand the cause of the suffering. And the good news is that this condition is curable, which is the third noble truth, the cessation. And there's a path to deal with it, which is then the fourth noble truth. Then there's a question: how can you have certainty of view from the outset without having had some experience first? Do we need a certain kind of faith in the teachers and teachings in order to have this certainty? No, we should actually have doubt. We should begin with doubt. Of course, initially, we're going to be attracted to teachers and they speak to some sanity in us. And also we come across a teaching and it speaks to us. So we have a faith from that point of view. And this is what we call this, we call it sometimes clear or inspired faith. But then there's also what's implicit in that faith is the sense that I'd like to have what she's having. I would like to be like they are. And that's where we then have a journey. And that's where we begin to, then we have to be critical and think, well, how am I going to engage in this journey? What is it that I'm working with? And that's where we need to actually apply critical thinking, to be actually have some skepticism about ourselves, our expectations, and what we're doing, and be realistic. And that's where we need to study the teaching and begin to think critically in the sense of understanding, how does it apply to me? Of course, we should initially check, does this whole Buddhist thing make sense at all? Maybe they're just completely, crazy, they're on drugs. They're coming from a different culture that doesn't apply to me. We have to identify what the universal value of this is. And then we have to actually pursue it seriously in terms of what really matters to us. And that's where we then begin to gain some faith. We begin to gain some trust when our critical thinking has been met actually with some satisfactory answers. That's where we begin to have genuine faith. And that's where we then begin to arrive at what we call irreversible faith. But to arrive at that, we can't just say, oh, I love all this karma and dharma and all the lamas, they're lovely, and I just want to be part of this big happy family, That's not going to work. It's going to have to come through us actually being really honest about ourselves and our process. But that's also where you could say what comes out of that is then what we can refer to as certainty. Like I was just talking to a friend the other day, and we were talking about this, and I remember this example the Buddhist teachers, they'll give. If we don't have certainty, it's a bit like we're operating on a very wobbly ground, and it's as if somebody says, "Oh, there's there's a wild animal in the back of your cave, and then somebody says, no, there's nothing there, and then you might think, oh well, there's no animals back in the bottom of my dark cave, you know. I like that thought. I wish there wasn't an animal there. But if you actually go in and shine a torch, you know, and I was comparing it to if you have a burglar in the house, you know, and this, you often see this in movies and so on, some couple lying in the bedroom, right? And then one of them says, honey, I think there's a burglar downstairs, and the other one who just wants to sleep saying, no, it's just a cat. Then that's the convenient way, right? But then going down, switching on the light, you see there's no burglar. Then you have certainty. So that's the kind of certainty that we need to actually have, to actually see, yes, this I have that. When we have that, then we actually have faith in the nature of the journey that we're undertaking. And that's where we can begin to understand the dynamics of the mind, how it works, how the teaching of the Buddha are applicable to this. Okay, then there's a question. The teacher or spiritual friend is said to be good if she attacks our hidden faults. For those of us who don't have the fortune of having a guru close to us point out our faults, can we say that a partner, wife, husband, or even close family member or friend can fulfill that role in terms of showing us our hidden faults? Many times partners can tell us things they see in us and we don't want to hear or see. Would this be possible the same? Would this be possibly the same that Paltramji was saying? Well, in some way, that there's definitely some truth in this. Of course, our partner, our well-intended friends that point out our fault, they can be, with their annoying sort of pointing out our flaws, can actually help us a lot. At the same time, it also applies that, of course, our friend and our guru are slightly different in that the guru sees our, you could say, enlightened potential. Our friends might not necessarily see that, but at the same time, they come with some expectation that we could be better. So we, in some ways, should be grateful for those people that point to our flaws. But of course, they're not exactly the same as a teacher. But anyway, I think it's true. It's difficult for us to have contact with the teacher, but at the same time, also so much of the teachings that we have, they are really about us recognizing our shortcomings, and so much of our communication with our teachers, even though we don't see the teacher personally, they will be about speaking about flaws that are universally very common. And so that's when we might be attending a YouTube or a Zoom teaching with Tsongtse Khyentse Rinpoche, and he talks about certain things and shortcomings and troubles and difficulties that we have, and we can kind of nod and say, yes, I have that too. So we are kind of exposed to this, you could say, the workability of our flaws then with the teacher, even though the teacher is not exactly privy to our unique, particular, and very interesting neurosis. It's okay. How are we doing for time? 1:45? Yeah. So Stephen then says, so then, we might say that the study and practice of the Dharma can be understood as a way to explore those many factors of experience, and then gradually find ways to diminish and eliminate the painful aspects of their occurrences. Such study and practice can be a way to explore how we are caged in by our unexamined habits of attention, by our viewpoints, so as to come out of such habits. And that's a little bit what we were talking about before, actually, which is about our study can lead us to understand how we can free ourselves from assumptions that are basic to our view, the assumptions that are basic perhaps to our way of understanding ourselves, and also to understanding the reality of ourselves and the world. And that's where we could be introduced to a very vast vista that goes beyond what we ordinarily thought. And that is where we talk about the value of the prajna, or the insight of study, reflection, and meditation. And this is then what informs our view. Yeah. Many Buddhists practice the Dharma with a sense of guilt, a sense of not wanting to disappoint their teachers. They practice with a sense of anxiety regarding their promises and pledges, such as Vajrayana Samaya. They do their prostrations and so on with a tight mind. As mentioned before, whether we are practicing the Dharma or not, we often proceed through this life with the same tight mindset. It seems that our basic attitude doesn't change, whether acting in daily life or in our Dharma life. It is in that sense that Tsongtse Khyentse Rinpoche once remarked that if we practice Dharma with a sense of fear and uptightness, this is not really Dharma practice. It is mental torture. So we should be very careful with this whole thing of guilt, both in terms of ourselves and also what very often, this is where Rinpoche's father, Chinli Nobu Rinpoche, he would talk about pointing at others, and he referred to this term samaya gun, pointing the samaya gun at others, meaning we have this particular uptight mindset, and then we project it onto others and saying, you're not keeping your pledge or your samaya. This whole thing then becomes a very toxic, actually, environment, which of course we needn't perpetuate that. We can always say the buck stops with us, we needn't continue it, but we could perceive it as happening. And that's where we need to make sure that we're not practicing in terms of, setting a very high, lofty goal about our enlightenment and our teachers, and then seeing ourselves and all the other people in the Sangha as being inferior, and making this sort of distinction where the teacher is holy and everybody else is unholy. Everybody is holy, and the teacher is just pointing to our holiness. So in that sense, everybody is operating with uncovering something. Everybody's recovering from this temporary condition. So that's where, for us to actually be on the path to recovery, we have to make sure that we're actually proceeding, you could say, according to the nature of the treatment, and that we're not just feeling that we're sort of strapped to a, or that we're, confined to some sort of institution or some sort of self-imposed governmentality or way that we think we ought to be. That is then what that would be mental torture. So in short, Steven says, regarding the material presented in this book, I would like to encourage the reader to find what is useful. If it is useful, use it, taste it, celebrate it, and enjoy it. If it doesn't go down well, maybe find some other way to explore this expansive material. The suggestion is that study might be a way to deepen and clarify our perspectives on what we ourselves regard as important. So then on the path of the Dharma, which is arguably the most important thing that we could ever do in terms of healing our condition of this delusion that fixates on what drives our suffering, then it is important that we, of course, apply it to our own particular temperament, our own particular inclination, and so forth. But it is important that we confront and work with the illness. And so how it's going to work for us, of course, is very individual. But I'd also like to say that what's going to be treated here in this book really is universal. So everything that we study in terms of the Abhidharma it's not situated within a Tibetan or Indo-Tibetan or Asian or Buddhist culture particularly, but it's about what really afflicts us or affects us universally in our, what we could tentatively call the human condition, but really which is basic to all sentient life, all living creatures. Yeah. Yes, I have a very tight mind. That's good. That's if ever you were to see a whenever you come across a Buddhist teacher, or if you're working in the context of Buddhist teachers, nothing could make them more happy than somebody says, "I'm uptight." What always would make a teacher or even an instructor worried is if you say, "I have a very calm mind and I'm a very just person." I'm, you're basically saying I'm very righteous. So to actually have that recognition, wonderful. Yes, I have a very tight mind. Great. We share that, a lot of us. So, and I have seen how my practice can often become something that is really just out of guilt or should do. My Catholic upbringing gets all messed up in it. I stopped doing my practice until I can find a way to practice without this. Is it best to keep doing the practice and just watch my tight mind? Well, obviously, yes. I mean, the practice is the treatment, but the practice is informed by the underlying attitude. So if the attitude is, I should do this, then the practice is, well, to some extent, the sort of the behavior of it and sort of circumstances of just sitting and so forth is not that bad. It's probably better than the alternative. But the thing is, the issue is not the practice, but it's about the attitude behind, which is, I'm stating the obvious here, but it is important then that we clarify that. And that is what we mean with the view. So that's where, for example, if we're working out, then it's hard work to work out, but we do it because we feel better when we do it. And yes, we might say, I don't want to go down to the gym and work out, but I should do it, shouldn't I? And we might have somebody else that we're talking with, and okay, I've said to so and so I'm going to do it, and then I do it out of guilt. But the thing is, when we sometimes do these things out of guilt, we actually feel much better for having done it. So, of course, guilt and so forth, all of these are not great, but at the same time also, we shouldn't let it stop us. And of course, we are conditioned by Catholicism or all sorts of various styles of conditioning. But that's where it's important actually that we are simple and clear about understanding what's going on. And then when we understand really that the mind is something that we can work with, and beginning to see this is happening, and gosh, how nice is it when I just let the mind settle and be present. Then while this settling the mind is very, you could say, adverse to the itchiness of the neurotic mind, then if we say, I should do it, and we're not talking about some sort of Victorian discipline, but that we just have sort of a no-brainer simplicity, sort of very Zen approach of I just do it. Then we actually it begins to make a lot of sense to us. So voila, that's my pep talk for, yes, keep doing the practice. And yes, watch my tight mind, but also sort of just understand that this thing we call the tight mind is actually not a tight mind, but just many different little things that we can fiddle with, we can work with. And one very helpful thing is when we sit down and begin to not so much believe in our thoughts, begin to just come back to connecting with where we are, sort of get out of our heads. Could you say that it isn't so much about eliminating part of ourselves, but more about transforming our relationship to our habits and parts? I'm reminded of the concept of the 5 wisdoms. Oh yeah. Even before the 5 wisdoms, even just talking dependent arising, just talking cause and effect. Everything is, made up of so many different causes and conditions. So, it's not about eliminating parts of ourselves. Just a moment of us turning in the direction of something that's light and open, us even looking up. Sometimes we look down. Even us getting out of our heads, maybe just going for a walk, maybe just, Thich Nhat Hanh, he'll make a point of how it's important to smile, to say kind words, just one kind words, bring her flowers. Say nice words. These little things, take your kid for a walk, or just little things, take the dishes, take out the garbage, all these little things, they actually, they transform our relationships to our habits. Just to get out of our comfort zone. I was told that the reason I feel guilty is because I'm not doing anything to rectify my faults. Yes. Well, that's kind of the good thing is, well, yeah, guilty in a way. I mean, in the modern conversation, guilt is a bad thing, right? We shouldn't feel guilty. At the same time, we could see that there's very often a sense of knowing what it is that we're doing as being something that's destructive. And so whether you call it guilt or not, just being aware of what our destructive patterns are, we need to do something about it. So whether we call it guilt or not, there is very much a sense that we could work with who we are. We can work with what causes our suffering. Would it be correct, then another question, would it be correct to assume that if we understand what and why we are doing here, meaning practicing the Dharma, then we wouldn't feel a sense of have to? Yes, that's true. You know, it's like if we eat a lot of Danish pastries and we begin to feel bloated, then giving up the Danish pastries is practice of Dharma. So in that sense, staying away from pastries, having a healthy lifestyle, taking walks, all of that is something that we do without really a sense of have to, but more a sense that makes sense. Eating good food. It just makes sense. So when we're informed about nutrition, then we choose to eat good food. Similarly, also when we understand the mind, yes, then what we're doing here, the practice of the Dharma, makes a lot of sense. Okay, good. Simplicity, really. In the Buddhist teaching, we obviously talk about discipline, but we, again, with our conditioning, very often think discipline is sort of a heavy-handed thing, but it's really more just about simplicity. Just, again, knowing that, you know, the choice between Danish pastries and brown rice or something healthy is an obvious choice. So that's where there's a certain simplicity about it, yeah. Good. Do I have the dedication ready? I'm not sure I have. I had all sorts of encyclopedias ready. Oh, let's see here. Abhidharma class. Dedication. Let me just see, where did we get to? Sorry. Oh, yeah. The Buddha's decision to teach. It's okay, that's where we'll begin next time. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. From the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be. And where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Thank you. You know, we practically everywhere in Tibetan Buddhism, you chant this dedication verse. It comes from the Jataka tales. So this is something that's shared all across the Buddhist traditions. It's part of the Pali, it's found in the Pali canon, and it's found all across. So it's a sort of a universally known dedication prayer. And this bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come. I'm not actually sure where that comes from. I'll look it up next time. But it's in Paul Rinpoche's commentary on the way of the Bodhisattva. This is actually how he actually defines the whole way of the Bodhisattva, the 9 chapters, in terms of 3 chapters for each of these bodhicitta made arise, and where it has arisen. Where it hasn't arisen, may it come to be. Where it has arisen, may it, be strengthened, and then ever increase. So each of the 9 chapters actually have 3 chapters for each of these. Okay, so what about the other dedication that you used on Wednesday? Well, that's the Wednesday dedication. But that's a good one too. The other one that on Wednesdays, the one on Wednesdays, that's actually all Longchenpa's writings. Very beautiful dedication also. Yeah. Okay, we'll just take a 2-minute break, and then I'll say a bit about practice, and then we'll do some practice. Okay, good. So just a few words about practice. So the practice of Dharma involves something that we ordinarily don't do, which is not doing anything. And this is not just being passive, but it's really actually about doing something that is very important, which is to actually begin to connect with our reality. So so with the practice of meditation, we're actually beginning to be truthful in terms of our being with ourselves, and beginning to rise out of a conflicted situation where we're based on our insecurity and our basically a sense of unworthiness and restlessness, and fundamentally an ignorant assumption around identity. Then we begin to perpetuate busyness that obscures the purity of our true nature. But all of that is really taking place on the basis of a confused assumption. And what so often happens when we relax, I'd like to say that we relax when we go on vacation, or when we have a drink, or the company of good friends, but that's very often just that we're distracted. So real relaxation is when we're actually unconditionally feeling well and calm, however that might happen. But it does happen, and it certainly happens. It does happen in the conjunction with being with friends, or holidays, or happy hour, or whatever it might be. But the point really is that we begin to let go of some of these narratives that we unfortunately seem to subscribe to. And that means that there's all the time an undertow of beliefs that are running through our mind. And the purpose of meditation is actually to yank us out of this gosh, what is it we call it when there's sort of like muddy waters? But anyway, yank us out of these murky sort of assumptions around ourselves, and take us into a space of clarity. And this is something that right from the start really works. The moment that we're not caught up in thoughts, and this is what we love about being entertained and so forth, that we're not thinking, and this is what sometimes sort of is what we love about being numbed in one way or another, actually speaks about how the moment that we can let go of these kind of circular thoughts, then we actually feel much better. But we'd like to do it without, you could say, the dope of distraction and so forth, and rather as a process of us discovering a truth about who we actually are. And that's what we do with the practice of meditation. We connect without constructing. We're not practicing positive psychology. We're not creating, you could say, new alternative narratives around ourselves. We're simply going out of narratives. We're beginning to just connect with the reality, the simplicity of ourselves, our life, our circumstances, and so on. And that's where the practice of meditation is a very real practice of just beginning to, if you like, commune or connect with our world, ourselves, the space that we're in. And so it's very important that we have this foundation of calm abiding, or what we in the Buddhist teaching call shamatha. We might be restless and we don't want to sit down. And in some way, that's not really the problem. It's not that we have to sit down and be calm. It's more that the circumstances of calm, they enable us to see beyond some of these, you could say, very insidious assumptions. And that's where this sitting down enables us to actually begin to befriend and become comfortable with connecting with being where we are. And so the practice of meditation is not introducing something new, but rather enabling us to just be simple, be present, and being, you could say, in doing something very honest, which is just being there with ourselves. But we do something very significant when we're meditating, and that's something that doesn't happen ordinarily. We don't follow after our thoughts, and that can be very subtle, because we might have assumptions that are still sort of holding us in the background. And that's where it is necessary for us to have this structure of meditation in order to enable us to, you could say, increasingly become comfortable with who we are, increasingly be free of these assumptions. And that's where then meditation is something that needs to be part of our personal hygiene, in the sense that it's something that we just do. And we want to do it regularly. And when we're practicing meditation, we're not, like I said, introducing anything new, but we are introducing a very important element, which is peace, non-distraction. We might not necessarily be calm, we might have all sorts of thoughts, but that's not really the problem. What we would want to is not to be carried away by these narratives and these ruminations that we have. And that's where meditation is being quite proactive in terms of cutting through some confusion that inevitably, ordinarily happens. So with this cutting through, we do more than just become calm. We begin to arrive at a wider perspective, a greater way of seeing ourselves and seeing the world. It's a more accurate way. It's not informed by our panic or our reactions or our wishful thinking or our pain. It's a very realistic sense of just accommodating what's there and beginning to see something that's greater and grander, that's at ease, that can be trusted, that's not ruled by our frustrations and so forth, something unconditionally good. And this is then where we speak about something that goes beyond just the actual practice of meditation and connects with something that is an unconditional intelligence that we naturally have. And that is what we then refer to as wisdom or prajna, and sometimes jnana, and sometimes all sorts of things. But it's this, what we universally refer to as vipassana, wider perspective. It's seeing. It's beginning to have a revised and bigger view on our reality. So we do this universally all across the board in Buddhism, and we do it through sitting, we do it through focusing the mind on an object of mindfulness, and it's on the basis of doing this that we begin to then have some wider perspective. So the foundations of meditations, as I presented here, comes from Chögyam Trungpa, who taught this in the context of the traditions of Ati and Mahamudra, Dzogchen and Mahamudra, and comes very much informed from that tradition. At the same time, it doesn't use all these big words, but it essentially amounts to this direct relationship with this condition of basic goodness that's innate to us. So in that sense, we're not defined in terms of our confusion, but we're more defined in terms of this quality of goodness that's innately who we actually are. So with the practice of meditation, we're doing ourselves a favor to connect with an experience and a dimension of goodness that is universally, what we could say, what we actually are. So we sit, we have a posture. We needn't sit on the floor. We can sit on a chair, but it's important that we have a good, dignified posture where we would say it's good if the spine is straight. We also take the shoulders a bit back. If you look at an image of the Buddha, a Buddha statue, you can see how the Buddha sits and projects this wakeful body language through his posture. We also take the chin in a little bit. We lower the gaze. We don't need to close the eyes. In fact, keeping the eyes open enables us to more integrate with our world around us. We might sometimes wish to close off, but in general, we'd actually want to integrate. And by keeping the eyes open, we integrate really our meditation with our more ordinary experiences and our actual situation of space around us. We keep the jaw a little bit relaxed. We can have our hands on our knees. We can have our hands in our lap. But this constitutes the first aspect of posture. I've spoken about this many times, so I think many of you are already quite comfortable with the sort of the basics of the posture. And then as far as directing the mind, well, when we're meditating, and here we're going to do this in conjunction with the treasure of blessings, but the practice of the Buddha. But when we're actually fusing, initially we invoke the Buddha and through this, so you could say, approach of recognizing and rejoicing in the presence of enlightenment as embodied in the Buddha, but then dissolving the external reference of the Buddha, then we rely on the inner Buddha, which we then connect with through simply being properly present and not tagging along with the thoughts. And that's where it's very good to have something that is not conceptual that we can come back to. That's where the breath is quite helpful. So connecting with the breath is something that's not conceptual. Sometimes if we just leave the mind without any reference point, without any concept and so on, then we have subtle concepts running that are wondering whether this is this the non-conceptual state, or how do I know this is the non-conceptual state, etc., etc. We have plenty of thoughts running through our minds. So that's where it's easier to just have a very non-conceptual reference point to come back to, which in this case then is just coming back to the out-breath. And that's where we then, as we're sitting, just settling, then we just come back to the awareness of the breath that exits from our nostrils, then fuses with space, and then we allow this gap to happen as the in-breath takes place, and then again we're proactive in terms of directing our attention on the out-breath. It's quite helpful. It's actually more than helpful. It's rather important for the success of our practice that we are attentive to the breath, and that our attention doesn't waver, doesn't drift. That is where we begin to have this famous quality of the shamatha. Shamatha doesn't mean that we stop thoughts, but it means that we begin to be present and not distracted. Again, not being distracted doesn't mean then that we have to sustain a particular condition, but it's rather just that we're not carried away by this inevitable situation of thoughts that arise. Thoughts are very welcome to arise, but what we would want to do is be able to not be carried away, and to have a reference point like the breath is very helpful. At the same time, we're not going into trance particularly. So just focusing on the out breath and then letting go, allowing there to be a gap, also trains us in not necessarily sort of continually having something that we fixate on. So just being proactive, clear on the out breath, then allowing for a gap, and then again attentive to the out breath. This enables us then to have something that sustains us in the sense of having a place that anchors us, or something that anchors us from distraction. And as we're meditating, then thoughts are going to happen, which is a good sign we're alive and we're, but what ordinarily happens is we tag along with thoughts. This is normal, but that's why it's normal that we suffer. And that's why it's normal that we have all the various kinds of conditions of the toxic states of mind. And to free ourselves from that, we actually would want to have a little bit of a spacious attitude as thoughts arise, that we needn't kowtow to them. We needn't be controlled by the thoughts. We needn't submit to the thoughts. We can simply allow them to arise. And the arising of thoughts in itself is an expression of clarity. We could just let that clarity be, but we needn't tag along with the thoughts. So that's why it's it can be helpful to, as thoughts arise, just come back to the breath, not as a way of avoiding the thoughts. And we're not going to be measuring our progress in meditation by that we have less thoughts. That's not at all the point, but it's rather that we're not carried away by them. And by us not being carried away by thoughts, we begin to have some confidence in this unconditioned, this unconditional space of this is a little bit where we have this experience of vipassana, that we actually can have thoughts arise, and yet we needn't necessarily tag along with them. So in some way, we would sometimes say that the more thoughts we have and the more thoughts that we're not carried away with, well, then that's a good thing. But it's not necessarily that we're measuring it as such, but it's more to say that thoughts needn't be a problem. So as we're sitting, thoughts arising, us just allowing them, accommodating them to be there, then we begin to develop some ability to not be carried away with them. Then it's a bit like Milarepa, who would say that just like you have waves on the ocean, then the depth is not disturbed, and just like you have all the growth on the mountain itself is not disturbed, then likewise also all the arising of the thoughts doesn't necessarily constitute something that disturbs us. Some of you have heard this many times. If you're new to this, it's good to get some good instruction on meditation. And in the modern world, I haven't come across anybody more skillful in presenting meditation, particularly to us in the modern world than Chögyam Trungpa Rinpoche. So we just were studying a work called Mindfulness in Action, which is very helpful. It's also a really good book called The Truth of Suffering and the Path of Liberation, which is also very helpful. But you also do have many, many wonderful instructions from Mingyur Rinpoche, from Tsongtse Khyentse Rinpoche, from Dingpo Chense Rinpoche, from His Holiness Dünjam Rinpoche, and so on. Of course, there's teachings everywhere. And but at the same time, if you can, it's good to get them from somebody who, a living person, And anyway, good to be clear on how to meditate. But if you just follow what I've done was mentioning here, that's a good place to begin. What we're going to be doing presently is, and we do this all across the board, really, in all the various Buddhist traditions, we're going to preface meditation with the meditation practice with something that inspires us and takes us a little bit out of the realm of the ordinary. Not in terms of getting away from our reality, but really just beginning to have this wider perspective, something that embodies this greatness, that embraces the world with insight. And that's where, while we might sometimes fail to recognize our own enlightened nature, we, particularly here in the Buddhist tradition, we universally recognize the Buddha as someone enlightened and as embodying enlightenment. So invoking the presence of the Buddha has this effect of bringing in this dimension of the qualities of enlightenment. So we do that initially, then visualizing the Buddha and praising the qualities of enlightenment. And we use here quite a devotional language. And then we recite the mantra of the Buddha, the Dharani or mantra of the Buddha, and then we dissolve the external reference. We consider the Buddha dissolves into us, all the qualities of the path are perfected, and then we just settle without any particular sense of the Buddha as being external, but more with the sense of the Buddha as being really innate to what we truly are. Buddha representing our enlightenment, dissolving into us, we settle into this confidence of our own innate enlightened condition. And this is where we then practice shamatha vipassana, this non-distraction in conjunction with then this insight. And that is where we then would apply this method that I was just talking about, the posture, the coming back to the breath, and whatever thoughts arise. Well, actually, we just label thoughts thinking and allow the thoughts to be there, but we're not distracted. And that's where coming back to the breath is quite helpful. So we'll do that. Ordinarily, when we're not sort of doing this online version, we would practice 50 minutes where we do sitting for 20 minutes. Then we do walking meditation 10 minutes, and then again sitting 20 minutes. Here we're going to be sitting for 15 minutes. So we do the treasure of blessing liturgy, and then we do the practice of meditation for 15 minutes, and then we conclude with actually chanting a very beautiful liturgy called the aspiration prayer of Maitreya, which very much sort of gives a sense of the nature of the path. So that's what we'll be doing, and again, just to allow people to stretch or go to the bathroom or whatever, we'll just take a 2-minute break. Okay. Okay. There's a few questions here, and so of course, I'll just, in case these people are present, I'll just try to answer them. If one practice focusing on the breath, is meditation without counting the breath better? You can do whatever suits you. Sometimes it's helpful actually to have to sustain mindfulness, to count the breath, but then again, sometimes that can be a little bit of an obsession also. So there's a recommendation to count the breath, but then also it's okay not to. Yeah. What is trance? How would someone know if they've gone into that? Well, that's the problem really with sort of going into these sort of zones where actually you actually do lose a little bit of sense of consciousness. So trance is when you're sort of just absorbed in a zone, and it could be okay if it really had presence and clarity, wisdom. But the problem is sometimes we just get lost into it, and then we become absorbed in it, and we're really just being unconscious. Okay, and someone is expressing gratitude. Thank you. And somebody else is also doing that. So that's very nice. Okay. We'll be starting in a minute. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Apologies, the DJ is struggling with the medium here, but I think we're getting there. All right. Okay. Okay, here is the liturgy, and here is the the Buddha, as we'll be visualizing in the sadhana, but I also, while we're meditating, I'm going to cut the video feed and you can have something nicer to look at. So that's what we have here. Actually, this is a picture taken of Dingochen's Rinpoche in his young days when he was meditating up in the hills above Bangkok, which is where he was from. That's actually 5,000 meters above sea level, and no central heating happening there. Rinpoche used to just sit in a white cloth, as you can see. This is what people do in the tradition of yogis. So, so I thought to have that picture while we're meditating. Okay. Thank you. I think we're all donkeys of sorts. Yeah. Okay. If I break into fits of coughing, I might also mute myself. Yeah, Dingochen's Rinpoche was amazing. So if you have the opportunity, read his life and also the movie. They're both called Brilliant Moon. So this is actually a practice. This here is this is the Rigpa translation of the sadhana we've been using, and we've, as you know, probably we're doing this also in the morning, and also we're doing the Bhumi Sparsha practice, accumulating the mantra of the Buddha. So we'll be using that. So I'm just we're going to be using this more. So yeah, and actually we're indebted to Steve Klein, who actually extracted this so that it's so we just have the English. Okay, let's see, bump it up a little bit size. Yeah. Okay. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. In the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly, I take refuge until I attain enlightenment. Through the merit of practicing generosity and so on, may I attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all beings. May all sentient beings enjoy happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the sacred happiness devoid of suffering, and may they dwell in boundless equanimity that is free from attachment and aversion. As the union of unborn emptiness and the ceaseless appearances of interdependence, magically there appears before me in the sky amidst vast clouds of offerings, on a jewel-lined throne, on lotus, sun, and moon discs, seats, the incomparable teacher, Lion of the Shakyas, his color of gold adorned with major and minor marks. Clad in the three Dharma robes, he sits in Vajra posture, his right hand gracefully poised in the earth-touching mudra, and his left hand in the gesture of meditation, holding an alms bowl full of nectar. Like a mountain of gold, magnificent he shines in splendor, spreading beams of wisdom light across the whole expanse of space. The 8 close sons, 16 elders, and the like, a vast ocean-like retinue of noble beings encircles him all around. Simply think of him, and he grants the glory of the highest bliss, liberation from samsara and nirvana, the two extremes. He is the great being, perfect embodiment of every source of refuge. With your great compassion, you embraced this turbulent and degenerate world and made 500 mighty aspirations. You are exalted as the white lotus, Whoever hears your name shall never return to samsara. Most compassionate teacher, to you I pay homage. All my own and others' virtues of body, speech, and mind, together with all our possessions, visualized like Samantabhadra's offering clouds, I offer to you. All the harmful actions and transgressions I have committed through beginningless time, each and every one, I now confess with intense and heartfelt regret. In all virtuous actions of the noble ones and ordinary beings accumulated throughout the past, present, and future, I rejoice. Turn the wheel of the profound and vast Dharma teachings ceaselessly and in every direction, I pray. Your wisdom body is like space and remains changeless throughout past, present, and future. Yet in the perception of those to be guided, you go through the display of birth and death. Even so, let your form continue always to appear. Throughout all the virtues I have accumulated in the past, I'm accumulating now and will accumulate in the future. For the sake of benefiting all beings who are infinite as space, may you, the sovereign of Dharma, be forever pleased, and may all attain the state of the victorious one, the Lord of Dharma. Living beings like us, adrift in this degenerate age, have no guidance nor protection. Because of your kindness, caring for us with surpassing compassion, every manifestation in this world now of the three jewels is your enlightened activity. You are, then, our only refuge, incomparable, supreme. So from our hearts we pray with total confidence and faith. Do not neglect the great promises you made in times gone by, but hold us until we attain enlightenment with your compassion. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Supreme Teacher, Bhagavan Tathagata, Arhat, complete and perfect Buddha, glorious conqueror Shakyamuni Buddha, to you I pay homage, to you I make offerings, in you I take refuge. Te yada om muni muni mahamunaya soha. 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 Te yata o muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yata o muni muni mahamunaya soha. Te yata o muni muni mahamunaya soha. Om 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 muni Mani mani mamana so mani mani mamana. Oh mani mani mamana so mani mani mamana so mani mani. Mani mani mamana so mani mani mamana so. Om Muni Muni Maha Munaya Soha. From the Buddha's body there emanates a great radiance of multicolored rays of wisdom light, dispelling all our own and others' obscurations and causing all the genuine qualities of the Mahayana path to arise within us, so that we attain the level of perfection from which we will never return again to samsara. Oh, actually, that's something I forgot. In this edition, we don't have the aspiration prayer of Maitreya. I'll probably get that lined up next time. But anyway, in this case, for today, we'll just conclude with these dedications and aspirations we have here. We pray for the good health of the lamas. We pray for their precious lives to be long. We pray for their activities to spread and increase. May we be blessed never to part from them. By this merit, may all attain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be free. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish evermore and more. May the Buddha appear in this world. May the light of the teaching shine like the sun. May the holders of the teaching live in harmony, and thus may all be auspicious for the teaching to endure. Akashasya stiti yavat yavachan jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyat Jagadukani nignata Akashasya stiti yavat yavacha jagataha stiti tavan mama stiti bhuyat Jagadukani nignata Tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. Tavan mama stiti bhuyat jagadukani nignata. As long as space remains, as long as the world remains, may I too remain to alleviate the sufferings of the world. Thank you. Probably most of you know this, but in the mornings, we're doing some practice. There's the practice we've been doing for some time now, which starts at 7, which is basically refuge bodhicitta, chanting the Heart Sutra and then sitting for 20 minutes. And that continues. But what we've done also, because Tsongtsakhen Rinpoche has been encouraging really in very much with awareness of the situation of the world and the need for doing something and working sort of on the within the realm of the unseen, really what we could call the spiritual level, and what sort of runs through the nature of our experience of the world. To really support that, then practicing what Rinpoche calls the Bhumi Sparsha, which is this phenomenally beautiful gesture. If you look at the image of the Buddha touching the earth, which is really what we're doing with the Dharma, we're connecting with reality. Nothing particularly miraculous happening in the tanka here. What you're seeing there, all the attacks of neurosis and distraction that is sort of challenging the Buddha. But if you notice how all these around the Buddha, there's then these flowers, and that actually signifies that the Buddha's connection with earth and his sanity transforms all these sort of mad phenomena into flowers. So they, rather than harm him, they just settle gently as a rain of flowers. And this is significant, really, in terms of what the Buddha is teaching. This touching the earth, enlightenment, uncovering the purity that's innate to us in our world. And so we do this through, and Rinpoche has been wanting us then to do really invoking the Buddha and chanting these dharanis or mantras that we just were, Om Muni Muni Mahamune Soha. So we'll be doing this practice basically that we just did here in the morning. So it'll consist of us chanting what we were just chanting, and then I think for 15 or 20 minutes, then chanting the mantra and then concluding. So that'll basically run from 7:30 to 8 o'clock in the morning. So if you want to join in at that point, you can join us at 7:30, more or less, depending really on the instructors, but roughly speaking around 7:30. Maybe join a little bit earlier just to be safe. But anyway, then chanting the liturgy here, the treasure of blessing, and then chanting the mantra, really in honoring Rinpoche's advice to do something really with the situation we have in the world. So so you're very welcome to join us for that. Other than that, you have some other programs. I think you can read about them on the web. I would recommend Bridget Gebby's program on Saturdays from 3 to 4, which is instruction on Shamatha Vipassana. And also there's sort of regular mail outs about the programs that we're running. Thank you very much. See you soon. Thank you. Somebody's actually asking about, look, the programs that we're running, they run by donation, so it shouldn't be a problem whether you're a member of SIA or not. Yeah, we would want everybody to be able to attend. The accumulations that the 100 mantras that we chant here, we can count that as well as part of the Bhumisparsha. Yes. Okay. Would it be possible to share this picture in the drive? Sure. You can find it many places though, but yeah, sure. I'll put it up in the Dropbox folder. Okay. See you.